We are Rogue Media Sports.
There are any number of reasons you might consider selling your home. To move closer to family, live within a smaller budget, or just wanting a change of scenery. Whatever your reasons, having to figure out all the various housing market trends in your area may not be what you signed up for. That's where an agent who is a realtor comes in. Realtors have the expertise to help you find the right price and navigate the process to sell your home in a way that's right for you. That's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
It is Doomsday Podcast, a Denver edition, and we felt like we needed to do this. We don't react to every preseason moment, but when Ed Werder travels with the Cowboys to Denver, Colorado, specifically Inglewood, and spends a few days in the mountains with the Broncos and the Cowboys, it feels like a good time to get together for a Doomsday Podcast. Ed, it's fun to, I know you'll be headed back our way soon, but that had to be cool, your longtime relationship with the Broncos, and then to see the Cowboys show up. They're on campus. Now, it seemed to be, I had to kind of laugh, and it probably wasn't funny to you guys. I think some of the Cowboys reporters thought they weren't anticipating some of the rules about practice. But other than that, Ed, take us through some of the pageantry. I like some of your photos. It seemed like the Broncos fans that were there, and I'm sure there were some Cowboys fans that showed up, seemed like they were treated to a good show, and it just looked like a fun atmosphere. What was walk us through, take us kind of behind the scenes of this Cowboys-Broncos joint scrimmage that took place on Thursday.
Well, I think the 7,000 fans who sat on the hillside and watched the Cowboys and Broncos kind of scrimmage their way through practice on two different fields. I think they saw a lot more entertainment for free than all of the 60,000 fans who were at the preseason game on Saturday night got to see, because the starting players on both teams were very involved in the Thursday practice, as was the plan by both new Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett and Mike McCarthy, who the two know each other very well. I think Nathaniel Hackett has known Mike McCarthy since he was like 9 years old, because Mike worked for Paul Hackett, both at the University of Pittsburgh and in Kansas City. And Paul Hackett, of course, has ties to the Cowboys. He was on Tom Landry's last three Dallas coaching staff. So those two know each other well. And so I think they felt comfortable and that they could trust one another, that this was not going to dissolve into something unproductive, although there certainly were a number of skirmishes, especially on the one field. The field where the Cowboys offense was going against the Bronco defense seemed to be the field where there were some fisticuffs and some disagreements. And the other field where the Bronco offense and Russell Wilson worked against the Cowboy defense just seemed to be the Broncos scoring a lot of points and on a regular basis in the red zone activities. But the fans were there. They were chanting, "Let's go Cowboys, let's go Broncos." I mean, it was sort of a spirited competition among the fans. Russell Wilson goes over to the fans every day on the hill and shakes hands with everybody in the first row, slaps hands as he runs down the field. Then before we even talked to him, he did his press conference that Thursday. He spends like 45 minutes signing autographs. I know Patrick Smythe, the Broncos PR guy, reached out to Russell when the Broncos acquired him in the trade from Seattle. And they said, he said to Patrick Smythe, wrote him and said, here are some things that we think are important. I think it's important that you sign autographs for, fans, at least on the first day. And Russell responded, "I sign every day." And so that was not going to be an issue. And he did honor that. And so I got the chance to spend about 45 minutes in Nathaniel Hackett's office talking to him about this Broncos team and Russell Wilson and what he thinks of the 33-year-old, former Super Bowl winning quarterback. But mostly I thought it was good competition. I thought they got a lot of work done. with the starting players, as was the plan. And, McCarthy pretty much indicated that they were going to hold out a high number of their starting players once they got to the game. They like the fact that you can get intense and you can get physical to a point in a joint practice, but you're still protecting your quarterback. And then in a game, of course, your quarterback could get tackled, he could get hit, he could get cheap shotted. And we saw, some of those things happen in the game last night, but it didn't happen to 17 of the presumptive 22 starting players for week 1 for Dallas, and Russell Wilson didn't play, nor did Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton or any number of high-profile, big-money Bronco players.
I'm glad that Nathaniel Hackett seems to have a good handle on the Doomsday podcast and what Ed Werder brings to the table, and did have you into his office. That's a good sign, Ed. I hope you don't fall in love with these Broncos, and leave us behind, the Cowboys. You don't get that kind of time in McCarthy's office. I think Mike likes you, but I don't know. Now, the Cowboys do have a new PR, head of PR, and did you get to cross paths with Tad, and did he seem like a big fan of the Doomsday podcast, or do you think we're going to be in good stead with him?
I did meet Tad for the first time. I spent a week out in Oxnard, and you were out there for much of that time as well. And he did not get hired. He was not announced as Rich Dalrymple's replacement until the following week. And so he did not rejoin the team until last night at the game. And I did meet him at the game last night. Seems like a very nice guy. I didn't get a chance to get his philosophy on podcasts. I know the previous regime was not real accommodating to most podcasters who are outside the building at the Star. So I'm not sure. But, I wrote Tad a text message when he got the job, and I told him I looked forward to working with him. And as far as expectations, ESPN covers, he worked for the Cleveland Cavaliers of the NBA. And I said, basically, ESPN covers LeBron James the same way we cover the Cowboys, incessantly. So expect to see a lot of me. And, hope we can work well together. But, he seemed like a very nice guy.
Good. I
was surprised McCarthy didn't blame the game more on him since he was the newcomer. He was in McCarthy's press conference kind of supervising things with Scott Agulnik, who's a holdover. I did tell Tad that I think he's got a very good staff that he inherits, and he seemed comforted with the fact that he would make his contract and maybe not have to do a whole lot of work. Wouldn't we all like that scenario?
Absolutely. All right.
I say that in jest, obviously.
Absolutely. Yes, Ed. We know you're finally
Tad doesn't
tuned
know
sarcasm.
my sense of humor,
Tad has to be familiar with your work. All right. We've got a lot to get to, and I want to get into the scrimmage, and I want to get into a little bit of the preseason game last night and the travesty that was the continued issues with penalties. Frito, please play the music, sir. Doomsday podcast, Denver edition. And we'll get into more. I want to get, Ed, some of your observations, some of your firsthand observations for various reasons. And I believe this was maybe under the Denver rules. You weren't able to do, a lot of the reporters weren't able to do a whole lot of live tweeting during the practice. We did hear things after the practice, but I want to hear, I know CD had a nice touchdown. Some of my buddies were a little upset, Ed, I won't name names, but they sent a photographer. They spend all that money to send a photographer, and he's sitting there right under where CD caught that touchdown and couldn't take a photo of it. They had said no photos during the practice, which is just like, unbelievable, but whatever. These things happen, and sometimes you just have to play by the rules, not something I love doing. So we'll get into, Ed, some of your comments on the scrimmage. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, to that point, I know there was frustration among the professional photographers for the local newspapers who were, traveling with the Cowboys and wanted to be able to get unique photography and images of the work between the two teams. And Babe Laufenberg was also sitting next to me for a time. He had binoculars, so everybody was going to him, who's that? Because it always seemed like the players were being run away from the end of the field we were on and toward the fans who were arrayed up on the hilltop. And so I said to the two of them, I said to Babe Laufenberg, why don't you just walk around the outside, go, position yourself as a fan on the hill. You'll be able to see and shoot everything.
That is funny. The fans could take any pictures.
The fans had a far better view than the rest of us, and there were no restrictions on what they could do.
Video and everything for the fans, but the media couldn't, but whatever. Ed, I've noticed some of our listeners and readers don't always care about our issues. Ed, let's get to the game a little bit. This was, and I did something kind of rough. I went back today and actually rewatched a little bit of it, and especially kind of the first half, because I wanted to see, okay, what is Tyler Smith? I want to focus in on him a little more. In watching Smith, watching McGovern, watching sort of that battle and everything. I mean, Ed, Tyler Smith, and one of them looked like a pancake to me. It may not have truly been a hold. And we know that the NFL officials early on are going to call these things and let everybody know what their points of emphasis and apparently illegal contact. I mean, they are doing everything in the world to help these offenses. But what, again, an embarrassment. I mean, last night, Ed, I think the final number that I saw you tweet about was 16 penalties. Cowboys had 9 of those. 17 penalties. Okay, 17 penalties.
Total penalties.
I think 9 by halftime. And McCarthy was disgusted in the halftime interview. Kyle Yeomans went up to him, and McCarthy was just like, it's not good enough. I've never seen a coach that upset at halftime of a preseason game. Of course, they were down 17-0 because the Broncos you don't want to give in a thin air a guy like McManus another crack. And he tried one from 57, and that was Kelvin Joseph. I mean, we heard all about Kelvin Joseph and, oh, man, he's taking a step and he's going to be fine. And he didn't even, first of all, he was offsides and he didn't even get close to blocking the kick. If you're going to be offsides, at least get in there and get a hand on the kick or something. The guy wasn't even close to blocking it. McManus misses that field goal, gets another shot, makes it from 52. So, Ed, I just overall, and we can get into some of the different players and all, but I mean, not a great look. And again, we understand these preseason games are not the end-all, be-all, or they would put some starters in there. I mean, there are only probably 2 to 3 potential starters that were in that game. But it is an embarrassment to the coaching staff in the organization to basically pick up where they left off, which is an embarrassing amount of post-snap, pre-snap, just really mind-numbing penalties. So all in all, I mean, that was about as bad a start as you could have in the preseason.
Well, Mike McCarthy did seem to be irritated. Maybe he was just irritated by being asked about penalties at halftime by a team reporter because he really tried to downplay it and seemed totally unfazed by it in answering questions after the game with the general media. He was like, what happened? I know why you're asking last year, but this is a different team. To me, that's a bigger indictment. It's a lack of institutional control. McCarthy's team, they play yellow flag football way too often. They ended their season with a playoff loss to the 49ers in a game in which the most penalized team in the NFL had 14 penalties. And then on their first time they're back in uniforms and on a football field, they got 17 penalties. They were the most penalized team in the NFL last year. They never had 17 penalties in a game. There were only 4 times last year that a team got penalized 14 times or more, and the Cowboys did it twice. 2 of the 4 were the Cowboys. And, I think it was an issue across the board. I mean, they had infractions committed by offense, defense, special teams. They had, rookies, veterans, so young and old. It was just ridiculous. And one of the things Jerry Jones was so frustrated about, one of the things that, when I talked to Charles Haley and Darren Woodson after the Cowboys season ended last year in the first round of the playoffs at home, was that McCarthy never fixed the penalty problem. And here they are doing it again. And it was a problem a year before that too. It's been a problem ever since McCarthy got here. If you look over, his 2 years of coaching, the Cowboys in total have the most penalties in the NFL during those 2 years. They finished 25th one year, and they were dead last year. Most penalized team in the NFL. And he talked about it early in training camp that, hey, I now know, that this is a team, I like our play style. We want to be physical. We want to be aggressive. But I now know after last season that this is not a group of players that I need to push. I need to pull them back. And yet here they were going over the edge on a consistent basis. I mean, Dante Fowler with a penalty, at the goal line, right? One play before Denver scored its first touchdown. In fact, all three of the Denver scores included at least one defensive penalty in those scoring drives. And so it really hurt them. And this is something they've got to get under control. And I think it's fair to question, given the recent history, whether Mike McCarthy can do that. I know he's irritated by the subject. I know he thinks 1 year doesn't have anything to do with the next, but it sure seems like it was a carryover from, last year. Now, last year in the playoff game and really throughout the season, I think it was a Raider game. So that was Thanksgiving. They had 2 14-game penalties 6 weeks of the season. And then the first time they're on a field with guys, many of whom aren't going to make the team and won't be on the field, but there were still way too many penalties. The average number of penalties in the preseason so far has been 6 per team. And the Cowboys had 17. It's almost 3 times what the average is. So don't act like, it's unfair criticism when you lead the league in penalties 1 year and the next time you come out and you set the high mark for the preseason week 1. Let's see what they do after this. But yeah, that was bad football and it was detrimental.
Yeah, I agree. And that's an interesting point you made, a distinction. That may have been McCarthy mad that was the first question. Maybe he thought because it was a team employee that there would be a nicer way to go about it, but I don't know how you ignore that, and I'm glad it was not ignored. Tons of penalties, breakdowns, and then Ed, some of the players, and we interviewed some of these guys. Nahshon Wright is bigger. He's added 14, 15 pounds. He looks more physical. I mean, I was excited to see him, and quite honestly, he one of those touchdowns he got beat on. He got burned on another deep ball. It was not all good news. Joseph got beat for a touchdown. Kelvin Joseph. I mean, these are opportunities. We say about these preseason games, no starters. Well, that doesn't mean there weren't contributors out there. I mean, from what I could tell, like number 30, the 5th round pick that we've kind of joked about, that was the one they got for Amari Cooper, perhaps, Deron Bland. I liked him. I mean, he came up, played physical, and really seemed to give the Broncos some problems. But the other players, I'm talking about Joseph and I'm talking about Nahshon Wright, who you want to take the next step, really didn't. And to your point on Fowler, he did make one play where he sliced inside and hit the quarterback and broke up a play, and that looked really good. He also lined up offsides on a play. I mean, Sam Williams lined up offsides. You remember on the TV broadcast, Ed, they were like, okay, it's 3rd and 13. This is Sam Williams' play. He's brought here to be a pass rusher, and he lined up over the line. I mean,
and those are all the things that, McCarthy, he says there are competitive penalties and there are, foolish penalties, and there's the pre-snap penalties. I think the ones that generally irritate coaches the most. When it's the result of being aggressive and physical and trying to make a play, I think coaches are more forgiving and understanding about that. When it's just the kind of things you just talked about, lining up offside, illegal procedure, holding especially on a running play. Those are the things that, are beyond unacceptable. But when you have 17 penalties, you are going to have some of everything. And, I think talking to coaches today, they thought Bland played well. The Cowboys have their 3 starting corners, I think, in Diggs and Jordan Lewis and Anthony Brown, none of whom played in this game. But you're gonna need 4 corners or more during the course of a season. And To the point you're making on Nashawn Wright, I mean, he gave up a 20-yard pass play. He gave up a 40-yard pass play. He had interference on a ball that negated on a penalty that negated an interception he had made early in the game. And then he got beat for a touchdown. And all this was happening without Russell Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, and Cortland Sutton on the field.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's playing against athletes who should not be that much superior to him if he's a legitimate NFL player. And we have to remember that when he was drafted, he claimed he was Richard Sherman with more talent. So we haven't seen that yet.
You can't discount everything he and others have done in camp by one preseason game, but it's just not a great look. When you get lit up, Ed, as you know, Josh Johnson, sometimes you'll see a quarterback playing in the preseason and you're like, wait, he's still in the league? And I think this is his 15th season. I mean, that's unreal. And I would think when he first got into the league, he was kind of thought of as always pretty athletic and can move around and everything. Now, I just think he's a savvy type veteran who can kind of get you through a couple of games if he had to. So, but I don't think anybody would argue that Josh Johnson's one of the best backups in the league. And
Josh Johnson is competing with Brett Rippon for the backup job. Like, he might not make the team.
Correct.
He looked like last night he should make the team. He looked like he should make almost any team and maybe start for some based on how well he threw the football. But he's a 2 or a 3 at best. And he's been on a lot of different teams, most of them not for very long, and he's been in very few games. So he's by definition a journeyman who should not look as good as he did last night, especially playing in a new system. And Nathaniel Hackett's never even called plays in the NFL, coming over from Green Bay, and didn't seem to have a single problem with getting plays called into to a veteran quarterback who hadn't been on the field very much.
Did I think before we started today, Ed, you were sort of joking about the early days of the Cowboys with Jimmy, that first win. I think they had the preseason. They may have gone undefeated that preseason, and he was racing off the field, giving it the arm pump.
He and Jerry.
Did you get any of that feel from this new Broncos group that when they made it 17-0, that there was some jubilation down on the field, like, hey, this is pretty easy. We're dominating these guys.
This game was played just a couple of days after the Broncos were sold to the descendants of Sam Walton and the Walmart empire for a record $4.65 billion. $4.65 billion. 5 years ago, the Carolina Panthers were sold for $2.2 billion. So that means there's been double the value of the previous sale in 5 years. And the new owners were there. They were introduced to the fans on the stadium scoreboard as they were on the sidelines. They were then photographed in front of the locker room, shaking hands with players as they went in. But no, I didn't get a sense that Nathaniel Hackett was overplaying the significance of winning the game. But I do think the Broncos are going to surprise a lot of people. I mean, if you looked at the last 2 years, a quarterback has been traded from one team to another or signed with a veteran quarterback's been signed, left his team and signed with another. And in his first year, won a Super Bowl. Tom Brady with the Bucs, and last year, Matthew Stafford. And I think Russell Wilson certainly fits that profile. He's going to have to get through maybe the toughest division in football, but Stafford did that last year. 3 teams in the NFC West made the playoffs. I could see 3 teams in the AFC West making the playoffs this year. I think Denver's gone from having the worst quarterback by far in the best division in football to having the second best quarterback. And only Patrick Mahomes, in my mind, is better than Russell Wilson right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of great receivers that sat this game out. The guys who did play, trying to remember the guy's name now. Was it 89?
Kendall Hilton.
Oh, there was
Kendall Hilton played in the game.
Hinton or Hilton, yeah, or Hilton, and that 89, whoever that was. My gosh, they were making plays and getting separation and making plays over along the sideline. And again, like we thought, some of these cornerbacks for the Cowboys should have stood up and looked a little better than they did. Now, on the other side, Ed, we needed to take a look at these young wide receivers. And you can go back and forth and say, well, maybe the quarterbacks weren't great in this game, and the Nooch and and Rush.
Rush.
Yeah, they're not. Nobody's.
Cooper Rush is familiar with the system. Cooper Rush started and won a game on the road in Minnesota last year.
Yeah.
Now he did it with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Cedric Wilson playing, pivotal roles, and Zeke Elliott in the game. And he didn't have any of those players yesterday, but you would still expect better execution than we saw from a veteran backup quarterback who has played some and is comfortable in the system. I did think they tried to get Jalen Tolbert, involved early on. The undrafted player I thought they wanted to see, Dennis Houston has looked good. I don't think he's looked out of place either in the joint practice against the Broncos or in the game last night. But the Broncos, again, they weren't playing their best. Pat Surtain didn't play in the game, and Justin Simmons didn't play in the game. Bradley Chubb didn't play in the game. So there were all kinds of opportunities for these young, inexperienced offensive players to be productive. And, because some of these guys are going to have to play. And if it continues on the trajectory we've seen to this point, I think the Cowboys are definitely going to have to go out and try and find a receiver or take up Antonio Brown on his offer if they're really desperate.
Yeah.
Could Jerry really ever get that desperate, do you think?
Well, he did it with T.O., but T.O. was at a different point in his career. And as maddening as Terrell Owens had been, I don't think he ever, he had never fell to this depth.
He never undressed and walked off the field in the middle of a game, I don't think.
No. So Jerry loves redemption tales, but I think this guy is too far out there even for Jerry. Now, they could have to bring in some help. Fahaku scored late. They finally. He's
looked good throughout camp, too. So
he's actually made a late push in camp. Tolbert's looked good. Dennis Houston's looked good. Tolbert in this game, had the drop. He had and we'll talk a little bit about the scrimmage, but I know he had a drop and maybe a fumble in the scrimmage the other day. And then I'm trying to think. They set out Brown, Noah. And then they set out CeeDee Lamb. I did see one player I've been kind of...
Can we say that again? Can you say that again?
What's that?
The Cowboys are so desperate, so thin at wide receiver, they protected Noah Brown.
That's where this thing is right now. Noah Brown did not get into this game. Ed, Noah Brown has been one of the stars of preseason in the past. This is when...
You want me to tell you an amazing statistic? I think you do.
Yeah, please.
No matter what you answer, I'm going to tell you anyway, so you might as well just encourage it. From ESPN stats and information, I kind of wanted to save this for week one, but I'm afraid the Cowboys are going to make a move at receiver, and that'll nullify the stat. But of the Cowboys players on the roster at wide receiver right now, Noah Brown and CeeDee Lamb are the only ones who have caught passes in an NFL game, regular season game, from Dak Prescott. I believe they have totaled 192 receptions between the two of them career. If the Cowboys don't add a receiver and go into the regular season week one opener against Tampa Bay at home with the receivers they have on their roster, and nobody else has any additional catches to add in their careers, this will be the fewest catches the Cowboys receivers have going into week one since 1989. Troy Aikman was a rookie, and they went 1-15.
Oh my gosh! Wow! And was that Michael's second year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was like Cornell Burbage and James Dixon, and guys like that, Kelvin Martin.
Yeah, Kmart ended up being pretty good, but but the inexperience, that is shocking. Ed, good one, man. If you got any more like that, please bring those to the podcast. I'm going to give you a few of my, and I'd like you to do this too, Ed. And then also anything else you gathered post game. You're always a guy who you're just like, grabbing whoever you want. And I always like those situations. So anything you maybe didn't get to report on ESPN, but you need to report here on Doomsday, you save your best information for right here. I would say from last night's game, I kind of like that Dowdle guy, 23. I kind of like the way he runs. This Harvard Shampkin. I like the Harvard guy, so I'm kind of was infatuated with all these backs they had. I mean, if Tyler Smith is allowed to hold on every play, they could really have some good yardage this season. I really think they'll get it up there. I like Ferguson, the grandson of Barry Alvarez, the longtime Wisconsin head football coach and athletic director. Barry Alvarez's grandson is Jake Ferguson. I like him. He's a guy you kind of get in space. He looks pretty smooth to me, and so I like what he does. I like number 50. Okay, I was rewatching this earlier, and I didn't get everything jotted down.
Devin Harper.
Yeah, for the Cowboys. Yeah, I like the way he closes in on the quarterback. He came swooping in there on a pass rush one time and was very disruptive, and I thought the TV broadcast didn't give him any praise. Bill is focused on, any kid that went to Mesquite High School or any high school in Texas, but number 50. I love Bill, so I'm just kidding, Bill. I know he listens. 50, I like that. And I'm trying to think if anybody else that I saw that jumped out to me. 47. Also, Ed, do you have your roster with you? 47.
I do have a roster with me.
47 comes in and makes a play on, kind of late in the first half.
Story Jackson, linebacker Story Jackson.
Yeah, ooh, I like how you say that. I know
it sounded like Keith Jackson, didn't it?
Yeah, it was very Nelly. Those players I just mentioned, Bland, I've already said. I kind of like some of the things that he did. I'm still fine. I'm going to not give up on Nashawn Wright because I like the guy. He's big. And I think he'll be okay. He just got himself he was in fine position, and then all of a sudden he wouldn't be. And one of those long ones, he turned around, and he didn't get back in time and find the ball. I kind of like him, and so I'm going to stick with him. But, Ed, any players, even maybe on the offensive or defensive line, that stood out to you?
I thought Neville Gallimore stood out when he was in the game briefly. Denver didn't play. I think 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen didn't play. So a guy like Gallimore, who Dan Quinn told us when we interviewed him for the podcast 2 weeks ago, he was a guy that he thought could take a big jump this season and become a special player. I think Quentin Bohannon, was another guy, inside defensive lineman who I thought played well in the game. And talking to coaches this morning, they confirmed that. Bland is a guy that they graded well out of this game. And I think on offense, I thought the running back Malik Davis looked like a good player. I thought Peyton Hendershot, fourth tight end, played pretty well in the game. I did find it kind of like along the same lines of, protecting Noah Brown, how absurd that seems and what a statement that really makes about how thin they are at wide receiver. Cavante Turpin, the 155-pound guy that they signed out of the USFL, he takes a knee on the opening kickoff instead of bringing it back. And then he fair catches a punt that he had at least 10 yards to return. And, he winds up hitting the ball against his helmet because he looks up and realizes I should have returned that. I didn't. It's like, who is this guy? He's Devin Hester. He doesn't have to earn a spot on the team. Like he's because Tony Pollard is too valuable to return kickoffs anymore. And CeeDee Lamb's too valuable to return punts. Cavante Turpin is now the Devin Hester of the Dallas Cowboys. He does not have to make the team by doing anything at all in the preseason. I thought that was a little absurd. I think the position that I would worry about beyond wide receiver is offensive tackle. Josh Ball played a lot. He played close to 70% of the snaps. And like I said, he wasn't really playing against, frontline guys on defense. He was in late in the game. And I don't think he distinguished himself in a positive sense very often at all. I didn't look at every play he was in on, but he had some penalties. He got beat several times.
Browning, there's a guy named Baron Browning was abusing him.
Yeah, and he's a guy who, Tyron Smith, he's missed, multiple games every year for the past 5 or 6 years now. And, I do think that people are going to look hard. I thought it was interesting what they did with their first-round draft pick, Tyler Smith. All through camp, Connor McGovern's gotten the first-team reps at left guard. Well, most of them at left guard. And then all of a sudden, they just clear the way for this game for Tyler Smith to start at that spot. They move Connor McGovern over to right guard, where they have Zach Martin, an all-pro, so he's never going to play there unless Martin gets hurt. And they just basically gave the job to him last night. And I think he played 33 snaps. He had 2 holding penalties, but I thought he did show that he's really a physical player. Yeah. He's able to dominate at times, especially as a run blocker. But man, they're going to have to get a tackle, I think, as well. So they're going to have to find a receiver, and I think they're going to have to find a tackle to feel comfortable with the depth they have at those 2 positions.
Like a swing tackle you're talking about.
Yeah. Somebody who can because Terrence Steele, he's okay. I think they feel comfortable with him playing next to Zach Martin. And I think Tyler Smith is going to get better on a regular basis. This was his first preseason game in the NFL. Didn't play at a big school. Had penalty problems in college. So that's a little bit of a concern, especially when he has them again in this game. I assume, though, he'll play better just on his own as he develops, and I think he'll play better when he knows Tyron Smith is playing next to him. I think Tyron Smith is going to help him, his presence alone. And they really seem to have embraced this guy in their meeting room and so forth. I think they're trying to help, develop the guy. But I thought it was really interesting after the game that Mike McCarthy, as much as he didn't want to talk about the penalties, what he did want to talk about was the running game. He wanted to talk about, he said, you have to make the quarterback successful to be a successful offense, and that starts with running the football. And then he said he couldn't wait to watch the tape. He thinks that this is exactly what they needed. He said how the offensive line plays is the last thing that comes together in the preseason, but he wanted to watch these young linemen as a run-blocking unit and seeing those guys step up. He thinks there are good things in this run game to come. I mean, wait a minute. Whoa. Mike McCarthy has never in 13 years in Green Bay or 2 years in Dallas emphasized the running game. This is a guy who plays through the quarterback. He said it in training camp this year. I play through the quarterback. I try to do everything I can to make this is Dak's offense. I'm trying to make Dak successful. And then Jerry at the end of the first week of camp says something like, we need to feature Ezekiel Elliott in the running game. And is that just justification for, Jerry caving in the holdout a couple of years ago and making Zeke the highest paid running back in football? He carries the biggest cap number of any running back in the league, coming off a season where he played hurt, and, that valor won him a lot of credibility with the front office. Like, I think the front office thinks more of Zeke Elliott right now than he did when he won 2 rushing titles early in his career because of what he did last year. But I'm really curious, what is Mike McCarthy saying, and where is this coming from? This is not him. But Jerry and Steven, they've won a different way. Their best teams have been run-oriented. And McCarthy's teams have always been quarterback-oriented. And yet there he was last night talking about watching these young guys block the run. He wants to see the run blocking. He was happy with what he was seeing in the run game. That's really interesting to me because, I think Dak would be a lot better as a play-action quarterback. And if they can present the threat of the run, I think that's when they are at their best, is when they can do both. We saw that early in the year when Zeke was still healthy. But they have, Mike McCarthy talking about them wanting to emphasize the run, that just is not consistent with the coach he's been throughout the course of his career.
Ed, getting reports that right before McCarthy took the podium, that Jerry was seen kind of whispering something to him. And it could have gone something like, Mike, get out there and talk about the run. Stuff it up in there. Get three in cloud dust. We'll be okay. And they'll maybe not ask you about those damn penalties if you'll get in there and talk about the run. I think it may have gone something like that. Now, Tristan Hill, I did want to mention, on one of those plays where the Cowboys got called, I had to start laughing at one point. At one point, the official almost had to kind of like suppress a smile because he said, 2 infractions, one on number 30 for illegal contact, one on number 31. It was like calling penalties on all kinds of people for the Cowboys. And I forget what they accepted, but 72, Tristan Hill. Now, I don't think that was the one where he slammed the quarterback down, so I don't think it was a penalty on him. He came racing up the middle. And so, to your point from earlier, where you mentioned Neville Gallimore, and I think Bohannon, yeah. I think they could have a pretty good rotation. And again, I hesitate because we know about Tristan Hill's past, and he's had kind of an up and down career, but they do have the makings of a decent. I even like the big cat Ridgeway. They've got the makings of who got hurt the other day, I believe, at the scrimmage. They've got the makings.
But he played in the game last night.
He get out there in the game,
but he played in the game. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's this team. They don't care if you're productive. If you play through an injury, they'll give you a lifetime contract. It is the Doomsday podcast as we continue kind of looking through and looking back at last night, the preseason. Ed, I wanted to take you to take us inside, and I also wanted to ask you at some point about your visit. You had one-on-one with Micah Parsons. I believe this was, Ed, is it correct to say that happened after Thursday's scrimmage?
Yeah, right afterward,
okay.
Right as he was going to the bus after practice, I had asked for Micah Parsons, and the Cowboys were good enough to make that happen for us. And I don't know if it got on TV or not, but I thought he was really interesting, particularly in 2 responses. You remember when we interviewed Dan Quinn, one of the things he said about Micah Parsons, what more can he do in year 2 after being Defensive Rookie of the Year as a 12th overall pick last year for the Cowboys defense. And one of the things he said was, well, he has some personal goals. And I know one of them is he wants to make some interceptions. He didn't have any interceptions last year. The Cowboys led the NFL with 25 interceptions. Micah Parsons had none of those. And Dan Quinn said, and I've told him the reason he doesn't have any interceptions, it's not because of a lack of opportunities we've provided him as coaches, it's because he has bad hands. So I asked Micah about that, and he laughed about it. And he said, hey, definitely, I'm going to prove I can pick off the ball. And it's totally a result of a lack of opportunities. He also said, and he wasn't specific about what exactly, but he did say he and Quinn are working on some new ways to allow him to create pressure on the quarterback, which he did better than anybody in the league last year on a percentage basis. And he had 14 sacks. So like I said, you're talking about a really versatile young player who has, unique skill set, and a coordinator and a play caller in Dan Quinn who, really values that kind of versatility and position flex, and is very imaginative in how he uses a guy like Micah Parsons. And then in closing, Micah Parsons said, I said, well, so that's your personal goal. What are your team goals this year? And he said, we got to get to that bowl. I saw the Rams. I was at the Super Bowl. It's something I want. It's something I desire. I'm speaking it to the world. Dallas Super Bowl. And so this is a guy who's basically all those years we listened to Jerry Jones talk about Super Bowl or bust. That's pretty much what Micah Parsons said at the end of our interview on Thursday in Denver after the joint practice.
Did you say, Micah, maybe tap the brakes and just get to an NFC title game? Like that would be shocking enough. You don't really need to be talking about Super Bowls.
I don't think I, in that instance, really wanted to admonish him for his bold rhetoric. It seemed counterproductive to my own personal goals at the time. Talking about personal goals.
Yeah. Okay, so that was Ed's post-practice visit with Micah Parsons. Now, Ed, during the practice, you were talking earlier about Russell Wilson going in there. Boy, he and Sierra have become a big part of the community. They're out there at Red Rocks hanging out and just signing autographs for everybody. But now the back and forth watching Russell, and it had to be strange for you for the first time you've put your eyes on Russell in a different uniform with a different organization after all those years with the Seahawks. But watching him function, deliver the ball, and then watching Dak like, how would you assess the performances of both those quarterbacks in the practice? I know I read that somebody had Dak for like 24 of 33, but maybe he missed on his last 3 straight throws, but for the most part, seemingly was pretty accurate throughout much of the practice.
Yeah, well, I did cover Russell Wilson when he was with the Seahawks, and they were, at their apex and went to 2 consecutive Super Bowls. I covered those teams a lot, especially in the postseason. And the thing that struck me watching this version of Russell Wilson in his second act after 10 years in Seattle was just how thick he is. Like, below the waist, his thighs and his calves. I mean, he's not a tall guy, but he's really a thick guy. And talking to, Nathaniel Hackett, he's a guy who's 33, but he can do everything. Like, he can still move around. He can still escape the pocket. They think he can throw on time. One of the criticisms of Russell Wilson late in his time in Seattle was he's been hit since 2016 by far more than any other quarterback in football. Carson Wentz is second. And he obviously was frustrated by that, but he was partly responsible for that. But I will just tell you that there aren't too many quarterbacks that I've seen who are better with the ball in their hand when the game's on the line in the fourth quarter. And he wants to keep it. He wants to make the play, and he's capable. I think he's the best deep ball thrower in the NFL. Dak's a different looking athlete. Dak's a big physical guy. Dak hasn't done what Russell has done, and Dak needs to do that if he's going to be considered that type of quarterback. But I think Dak is capable of that. I don't doubt that at all. But he hasn't done it. Russell Wilson's been there twice. Really should have won the game both times. He had a great defense. I think Dak has a great defense now. I think he had a great defense last year. I think it was really a lost opportunity for the Cowboys last year. I mean, they had it all. They had the highest scoring offense in football. They had the number 1 offense in football based on yards. They had a defense that scored the most touchdowns, created the most turnovers, had the most interceptions. That was really a huge missed opportunity for them. I think what happened to the Cowboys last year for Dak was, for different reasons, the same as, Tony Romo losing to the Giants. What was that?
2007 season when the Giants went to the Super Bowl.
When they were the number 1 seed against the Giants, and he'd been to Cabo, and so Dak's not subject to that criticism, but that was the same sort of missed opportunity for the Cowboys last year that it was for Tony Romo's best team.
Yeah, wow. I'm just thinking about that because Romo actually, they win that game and they go to an NFC title game, and I think everything would have changed. And you remember, you just triggered a memory. Didn't Wade kind of want credit for a wild card win for the bye? Yeah. He wanted a win there. I can't say that. Wade's a good guest of ours and a friend of ours, so we won't go too far on that.
And that's a good point, though. It is harder now for even a division winner like the Cowboys were last year. They still had to play in that first round of the playoffs, whereas Romo's team is a division winner. They had the best record in the NFC that year, so I guess they would have had a bye too, under any circumstances. But it is a little harder. You can win your division and still have to play another playoff game than teams had to back then.
Correct. Okay, other things that occurred. I know CD had a nice touchdown catch. What was the just talk about the on the offense a little bit, Ed. The receivers, how they looked in that scrimmage, and then the blocking, and then the fights. I mean, I don't know. I saw one report that seemed to suggest the Broncos were winning most of the fights. They may have taken the fight to the Cowboys. What was who seemed to be involved the most in those, and was it one position group that kept getting into it?
Well, I think Bradley, the biggest hit of
the day on
Thursday was Bradley Chubb took Zeke Elliott off his feet with a hit. And it may have been more that Zeke didn't see it coming than it was, the intensity of the contact itself. But Zeke handled it pretty well. Hey, you got me on that one, whatever. And Chubb afterward was saying it's all love. The thing that really struck me in looking at social media and reading the Denver accounts and the headlines versus the Dallas accounts from the very same practice. One was like, Cowboys offense, tears up Bronco defense. And then in Denver, it was all about how Denver, kicked their ass physically and beat them up and won all these fights and, showed the Cowboys who they are, kind of a thing. It was just diametric opposite interpretation of the same day's events based on, who your audience was or what your perspective was, perhaps.
Sounds like the two team sites weren't involved, though. This was more the actual local newspapers and everything. That's funny. Did Cowboys defensive wise, did Micah, who you talked to right after the practice, seem like, from what I could tell, he was pretty dominant in getting to Russell fairly often? Did he take over at times? Yeah,
he definitely had a great day in that particular practice, and they did have a hard time accounting for him, and they did have a hard time blocking him, whoever he was matched up against. But I mean, that happens every Sunday against the best players in the league when you're Micah Parsons. I think I don't think we have many questions about him at this point in his career after what he accomplished last year. But yeah, he was a guy who definitely stood out. I think the other thing that stood out was that Tyron Smith kind of limped out of that practice. He wouldn't have played last night anyway, but McCarthy was asked further about it once he left the podium, and he assured it was some kind of minor ankle injury and just a matter of days before he rejoins the lineup for at least practice. And they are doing this again. They flew back. I think they got in. They were talking about getting in at like 3:30 in the morning California time to LAX, and then having to bus up to Oxnard at least an hour, and then later this week, they have two practices down in Irvine, California with the Chargers. And those could be pretty intense practices too, because the Chargers are a lot to handle on defense with, Brandon Staley, their second-year head coach. So it'll be another physical week, and I think we'll see the same thing play out. They'll involve the starters with a high number of reps in the joint practices, and then when the game comes on Saturday night, you won't see anybody you recognize. What
about back to the Broncos scrimmage? Diggs, Lewis, all those guys, all the DBs. Did Brown, of course, and then I'm thinking of the safeties with Donovan out there, and as well as Curse. Anybody who kind of stood out of that group for the Cowboys?
Diggs didn't participate. They've been kind of monitoring his workload because he's got a groin pull or a hamstring, some minor soft tissue injury. So he was held out. I actually talked to his former Alabama teammate, Jerry Jeudy, after that practice, and he had said how disappointed he was because he really wanted to go after. He wanted to compete against Diggs in the practice and didn't get the opportunity. It just seemed like from where I was watching the goal line stuff that the Broncos really had the Cowboys crossed up with a lot of the play fakes and the RPOs and stuff that Russell Wilson was running in the red zone. I saw him throw 3 touchdown passes in that particular part of the field in that portion of practice. So I don't think the defense really distinguished itself in that particular day other than, a couple of individuals like Micah Parsons.
All right, Ed, our man on the scene in Colorado, a place that he loves. It's where he went to high school, college, and now lives part-time and has grandchildren there, has a couple of grandchildren that he loves seeing. At some point, we're afraid we may just lose him permanently to Colorado, but he is flying back tomorrow, so we'll be happy to see him.
Right now, I'm contractually obligated by ESPN to live in Dallas.
That's true. And
I might choose that anyway.
Oh yeah, at least
during football season.
You love the Dallas area, and we wouldn't know what to do without you. Lord knows we've thought about it, but Ed, any closing thoughts on what's coming up or what happened with Denver? Are you feeling pretty good about everything? And it will be interesting to piggyback on something you said. McCarthy wants to. It's like he wants to act like this is it's like they want it both ways, don't they? Jerry just came right out and said it. well, I kind of want to be patted on the back for those 12 wins. I kind of like that. Okay, so they like the memories of having so many wins last season. But the fact that we're on the historic pace for penalties last year, and then the embarrassment of what happened last night, they don't want any of that. It's like, that's last year's team. Don't bring any of that up. Oh, wait, you want to bring the 12 wins up? You can bring that up, but not these penalties.
Well,
and I thought
McCarthy in the press conference acted to your point of what you're saying. He did say, last year was a different year, and once we did kind of create our play style, we won a lot of games. And okay, that's fine. You did win a lot of games, but you didn't ever get rid of the penalties. Like I said, on Thanksgiving Day against the Raiders, they had 14 penalties, and in January on their own field in an elimination game, they had 14 penalties against the 49ers in a playoff game. So they never did solve that problem. And I think Jerry's not going to be real tolerant if that does become part of this team's identity again this year.
Yeah. And, oh, by the way, you're just a few weeks away from now. You're less than a month away from starting this thing against Tom Terrific, who we should add has taken about 10 days off for personal reasons during training camp, which is highly unusual, and I won't speculate on what that's all about, but it's that's very strange. And then, of course, Cincinnati before going to the Giants. So, Ed, this is not the problem. It is a problem. You don't get to ease into this football season. This is this hits you right away, so you better get this thing solved. And this sort of relaxed, we're going to be okay at wide receiver. I think we got a little bit of a glimpse on what that could look like. Although, again, let's see what some of these young guys can do.
Have a few more weeks
with Dak. Yeah, let's get a better look, because in the training camp practices, we were there for some of them, and then they put the pads on. And Dennis Houston, Tolbert, some of these others have continued to look pretty good. Ed, let me throw a couple of more numbers at you. Number 80. I like something he did.
For which team?
Cowboys. There was a receiver. I want to say he's like Brandon somebody. But anyway, get your roster out there. Who's number 80?
Brandon Smith.
Yep. I like his work. They whipped one across to him, and old Brandon Smith just kind of raced right on through there.
Yeah. So. Well, and you mentioned Simi Fehako from Stanford. I think he's a fifth.
Fehako. Yeah.
He's a fifth-round pick. Used to watch him all last year. He would travel with the team, and he went through the whole pregame thing with DiNucci or Will Greer, whoever the traveling third quarterback was that week. And they would do their own drills with some of the coaches. But he has played well in camp. He did score a touchdown last night. He did kind of block the defender out, was physical with him in the end zone. But it's also worth noting, look at who he's playing behind in the games. He's playing behind a third-round rookie this year, and he's playing behind an undrafted rookie in Houston right now. So maybe he'll earn a promotion and more playing time with what he did last night. That's what it's supposed to be all about.
Yeah. I think that's right. Ed, tremendous stuff tonight. I know you had a nice barbecue there in Colorado. I won't reveal exactly where you are, but Ed, nice job, nice work from there, and enjoyed this, and look forward to being with you soon. I may represent us out in San Diego. Or Irvine. I may go out that direction and see if I can attend some of that.
Go to Oxnard. The Cowboys are traveling down by train, so you might enjoy a trip down the coast in the train. Like, wasn't that Jason Garrett who used to do that?
Yeah. That famous picture of him waving out the window. Yeah. I just did some train travel from into Venice. A train from the Amalfi Coast to Venice. Love some train travel. You ever tried to sleep on a train, Ed, like an overnight type train? You ever done that?
I've never been on a train.
Like, how
I've never
is
been on
that
an actual
possible?
train. Like a zoo train or something I've been on, but not a real train.
A zoo train does not count. I was just thinking about covering the Eagles and all those. I would take trains throughout the Northeast. I guess you were flying in or driving or whatever, and getting your rental car. You just never had a reason to get on a train. That is fascinating.
Once they had airplanes, I had no reason to get on trains.
Yeah. Once they had first class on American, you were never going to get on a train again. Ed, appreciate it. Thanks for all your hard work, and I'm glad Doomsday could fund that and your travel out there to Colorado. And
I'll be submitting my expense report soon.
Oh, get those in. You're so good at those. Your editors always talked about how creative you were. All right. Ed, have a great night. This has been the Doomsday Podcast, with a shout out, by the way, some of our recent travels to Jim Turner Chevrolet of McGregor. That's great. And we got some exciting news on that front with some advertisers that we'll be introducing you to as the season gets started. Everybody have a tremendous evening. For Mark Frito Friedman and Frito Nation Productions and Ed Werder, I'm Matt Mosley. Good night from far north Dallas.
There are any number of reasons you might consider selling your home. To move closer to family, live within a smaller budget, or just wanting a change of scenery. Whatever your reasons, having to figure out all the various housing market trends in your area may not be what you signed up for. That's where an agent who is a realtor comes in. Realtors have the expertise to help you find the right price and navigate the process to sell your home in a way that's right for you. That's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best not sound you've ever heard.